Come, risen Lord, and deign to be our guest. Nay, let us be thy guests. The feast is thine. Thyself at thine own board make manifest in thine own sacrament of bread and wine. Amen. Taken as a whole, the 10th chapter of Luke offers profound insight into what it means to live on pilgrimage with Jesus. In the previous chapter, Jesus is transfigured on the mountaintop. His friends, overwhelmed by the brilliance, want to pitch their tents and stay forever. But Jesus leads them down into the valley toward Jerusalem, where his true glory will be revealed, not in light, but in the depths of human suffering on the cross. Over these past weeks, we've been tracking Jesus' journey from the mountain to the city. And along the way, he's been sending some mixed messages. 2 weeks ago, he sent out 70 disciples, telling them to travel light and proclaim peace. Last week, in the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus praises the one who stops to help, telling us to go and do likewise. But now, Jesus, the same one who praised action, commends Mary for sitting still. And he gently challenges Martha, the one actively trying to serve. So which is it? Go and do, or sit and listen? It's tempting to treat Mary and Martha like a kind of spiritual personality quiz. Where do you fall on the biblical Myers-Briggs, the spiritual Enneagram? Are you a Mary or a Martha? And just out of curiosity, Mary's in the house. Raise your hand. All right, hands down. Martha's. What I thought. A lot of Marthas in the house today. And those of us who might most identify with Martha might be a bit insulted at today's story. In fact, we might even contest Jesus, informing him that we were born this way and that our spiritual orientation is not merely a lifestyle choice. But if we place this moment in the broader context of Jesus' journey, we begin to understand Jesus isn't saying Mary is better than Martha. Both live in each of us, and in this moment, Mary has chosen the better part. Because Jesus knows the cross is near. His death is near. There is not much time left. And so what could possibly be more important than simply being together? Certainly not the casserole or the table setting or the flowers. This vignette reminds us that there is a time for everything, a time for action and a time for contemplation. Nevertheless, when Martha says, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work?" her words echo the disciples in the storm earlier in the Gospels when they cry out, "Lord, don't you care that we are perishing?" Anxiety causes us to feel resentful and unseen. And there's a familiarity in this story. You can almost hear Martha in the kitchen clanging and banging on pots and pans, hoping that Mary or Jesus will notice. And also note, the sisters don't talk directly to one another. Martha says to Jesus, "Hey, Jesus, tell my sister to help me." Just like real families, Mary and Martha triangulate. But Jesus doesn't chastise Martha for serving. Father Jim Martin points out the Greek word for her activity is diakonia, the sacred work of a deacon, a minister of the church. Jesus sees her service, but he also sees her worry, her distraction, the way she is fragmented, literally pulled apart in the original language. And seeing her, he says her name twice with tenderness, Martha, Martha. Both action and contemplation can be practices of love. But when hospitality becomes about ego or obligation rather than connection, it ceases to be hospitality. And we've all been there, so busy doing the thing that we lose sight of why we are doing it. I remember preaching at my grandfather's funeral just 2 days after he died. I was so frustrated with my mother for what felt like rushing it. And I remember saying, in a moment of frustration, I want to do a good job for Papa, and this is not enough time. I made it about myself, about performance. But my mother gently reminded me, Zack, Papa didn't care about the sermon or the service. He just wanted you there. Jesus teaches us that presence always matters more than perfection or performance. Now hear me, I'm not saying to go out and quit your job or neglect your commitments. The tension is real, especially for those of you in the middle of life, in those sandwich generations, often caring for young children and aging parents, all while working demanding jobs and trying to have a life. Sometimes rest just doesn't feel like an option, and Jesus knows that. But he does invite us to something deeper. Only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the better parts, not because service is wrong, but because God's presence must be our foundation. In God's loving presence, our to-do lists transform from obligation into thanksgiving, from all the things we have to do to all the things we get to do in the grace and gift of this one precious life. God lifts us from the weight of performance into the lightness of praise. Perhaps the most intriguing part of this story isn't Jesus' critique of Martha, but his affirmation of Mary, who does a peculiar thing. You see, sitting at the feet of a rabbi was a posture reserved for men in her day. But Jesus welcomes Mary there, sitting at his feet. And just as Martha assumes the posture of a deacon, Mary is assuming the posture of a disciple. And Mary would go on later to anoint Jesus' feet, foreshadowing his own act of loving service at the Last Supper. Mary, too, will act when the moment calls. But in this moment, Jesus praises her for choosing the better parts of listening, of stillness, of an open heart. In a world obsessed with productivity and production, practices of faith, prayer, Sabbath, worship, can be quiet acts of resistance. How might God be using these practices to cultivate a quiet revelation and revolution in you? As the voice of Jesus reminds us, we are not defined by what we do, but by who we are, as beloved children of God, loved in and through it all. You know, sometimes our busyness, all our little tasks, are just another way to avoid the real stuff, the real work. And you all know what I'm talking about. The hard conversation you don't want to have, the pain you don't want to feel, the grief you don't want to touch. And suddenly, it feels so urgent to clean your whole apartment, to reorganize your files, to sit idle, scrolling your phone. Sometimes our busy work is actually work avoidance. Sometimes stillness is distraction in disguise. The real work, the deep spiritual work, is about being present. My friends, God is calling us to seek Mary's heart in a Martha world, especially here in New York, where the hustle never stops and the Protestant work ethic runs deep in our veins, affecting all areas of our common life. Consider recent legislation that scrutinizes the work ethic of the poor, making food stamps conditional on employment, while billionaires just get richer and richer in their sleep. As if feeding your family is only deserved if you're deemed productive enough. My friends, that is not the gospel of Jesus. That is unmitigated greed dressed up as morality. Open your email, your calendar, your news feed, and the demands come flooding in. St. Bart's is a Martha kind of church, and thank God for that. Full of energy and work ethic, commitment to the city, to our neighbors. But even kingdom work takes a toll. We look at the injustices and brokenness all around us, all the wrongs waiting to be righted. And it's easy to become spiritually exhausted, burdened by the guilt that we're not doing enough. And the joyful feast of service can become a cacophony of clanging pots and pans, causing us to lose the imagination to see God's vision of love and abundance still possible in our world through the Spirit. And so to you who are weary and pulled in many directions, Jesus sees you. Jesus knows you. Jesus calls you by name, inviting you, even if just for this hour, to lay your burdens down and receive his peace which passes all understanding. It's a beautiful thought experiment to imagine the sisters Mary and Martha after the resurrection, perhaps going on to lead their own little house church, as many women, deacons, and disciples did in the early church, embodying for us the balance we all need between action and contemplation, service and Sabbath, moving from triangulation and competition to cooperation and camaraderie. We are invited into that kind of communion with God and neighbor every time we gather at this table in this holy house. And so I close with these words from a Celtic communion prayer from Iona Abbey. Jesus was always the guest, but here, at this table, Jesus is the host. Those who wish to serve him must first be served by him. Those who want to follow him must first be fed by him. So come, you who hunger and thirst for a deeper faith, a better life, a fairer world. Jesus Christ, who has sat at our tables, now invites us to be guests at his. Mary's and Martha's alike, my friends, there is need of only one thing, not perfection or performance, but simply God's presence, inviting our presence, in which we find perfect peace. So come to the table. Here at this table is the one thing you need. Here at this table is everything. Amen.